back. This is presentation on energy flow within the ecosystem. Want to make a point that please ensure that you watch the presentation I did on feeding relationships first before you go ahead and watch this presentation. Alright, so that's a disclaimer. Ensure you watch that one first. Alright, so let's begin now. We're going to recall that the sun is the ultimate source of energy for life on Earth, explain why food is the source of energy needed by living organisms, to understand that respiration is a process by which the energy is released from food, and describe the roles and types of ecological pyramids. Alright, so let's dive right into it. So first, we are recalling that plants use the sun's energy to make food during photosynthesis. We made that point very clear in our previous presentation on feeding relationships. So during photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water are combined to make glucose and oxygen. So if you don't know what photosynthesis by this, please go back and check what photosynthesis is. This is a concept that is being taught from grade 7 all the way up. So the glucose that is then used to make other carbohydrates by the plants, lipids, proteins, and everything else that the plant needs, it is done using this glucose and other minerals and vitamins that it gets from the soil. So the term food can be used for the term energy, because that's where the energy comes from the food, since energy is obtained from food, right? So the energy in the light from the sun is converted to chemical energy, and that chemical energy that we're talking about is glucose, even though we know that it is stored as starch, right, in the plant. The chemical energy usually, that is same glucose now, is going to be burnt, right, during respiration by plants and animals, where energy is released from the food, right, so that they can carry out their life processes. So the key right there is that we need to note now that respiration is the process by which energy is released from the food that we consume. So we consume the food that is one, now we need the respiration process to occur in the cells to burn the food to release the energy. Alright, now please note that the reverse of respiration is actually photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes light energy to make food, but respiration now burn that food and release back energy. Cool? Moving on. So just to visualize what we just said, the sun's light energy is being converted by photosynthesis into glucose stored in the fruits and leaves and so on and so forth, right? Some energy is lost via respiration here, and some energy changed into heat as was lost to the environment, but majority of that energy is going to be stored, and that is a key thing to note. So most, if not almost all of the energy that the plant absorbs from the sunlight is going to be stored as going to be stored in the plant. Some is going to be used by the plant for growing and doing all its life processes, and a little teeny bit is going to be lost, you know, through heat via respiration. Now you might be wondering, now, then plants really produce heat? Yes, they do. It is very small, it's very minimal, but it does occur. Note, only some of the energy created by the plant can be passed on. So the reason why only some of the energy can be passed on to the consumer or the herbivore is because only some of that energy is going to be stored. Remember, the plants have needs. The plant needs to grow, right? So and that takes energy. So it's not going to store every single bit of the energy. It's going to use some, it's going to lose some, and it's going to store some. Make sure you write that down. Now, animals, how animals obtain and lose energy? Basically, for animals at each trophic level now, this is what occurs. One, energy is obtained when the animal feeds. So when the animal feeds on another animal, then they obtain the energy from their flesh or whatever part they eat. Some of that energy is going to be stored in the animal's tissue. So when you see the chicken get fat, must store the energy. When you see the goat get fat, then storing the energy. When you see the cow and the other animals, the pigs, getting fat, they're storing the energy. Good. Some energy is lost in feces and urine straight out of the animal's body. So it doesn't matter what you do when you buy feed now, feed the chicken. When the chicken doodle, some of the energy is lost in the feces. When you feed the goat, some of the energy is lost in the feces and the urine that the animal produces. So the animal system is not 100% efficient. And most importantly, the organism, animals, they lose energy when they respire, because all of us, when we respire, we produce heat, and heat is a form of energy. Class, heat is a form of energy. So when the animals respire, they lose heat to the environment. Good. So if we look at the diagram below here, you can see a cow. Cow is feeding. So once the cow is feeding on the grass, that means that the cow is actually consuming a plant, and the energy that is stored in the plant is going to be now a part of the animal's body. Now when the animal starts to respire, it's going to produce heat, and heat is going to be wasted. Once the heat is lost, it is wasted. Good. Also, that animal is going to produce feces. So there are going to be some parts of the food, the plant, that is undigested, and it's going to be passed out of the animal's body. And it's going to pass out as feces, and other cases it's going to be passed out as urine. But the majority of the food, right, or the energy in the plant is going to be stored in the animal's body tissue, right? And that's how we say now. You see, once you feed the goat continually, the goat will get fat. Or the chickens, once you feed them continually, then get fat. Good. Because they're storing the energy from the food they eat in their body tissues, and it make them get fat. Now look at how the energy moves through a food chain. So the only thing I'm missing here is my arrows showing you the direction in which we're moving from the producer, which is the plant, to the consumer, which is the primary consumer, then to the secondary consumer, then to the tertiary consumer. Alright, so once we have this one, let me just add that in, because I think it flows better when we add in the arrows. So I'm gonna add in the arrows here just as I'm doing the presentation now. Don't want to stop it for too long, so you can see how I put together my PowerPoints. Basically, so I need to add the arrows here because it is important to show the energy flow in the food chains. Alright, so that's my arrow there. Let me make it a little bit more bright. So let's use this one. Okay, copy, paste one, two more. So take this one and put this one up here, and straighten it a bit. So guys, you can see that it is quite easy to put these PowerPoints together and then explain them to you. Just wanted to add this in. I don't know how I missed this one. That is important, but that should be it now. It looks a lot better. Let's continue with the presentation from this current slide. So here now is our food chain. Alright, and the ultimate big guy is up here, Mr. Sunshine, producing all the light energy that you need in this world. Good. So the light energy is now being absorbed by the plant. The plant can use a little bit for doing little growing and in little stuff, and make sure that everything is doing quite okay. Now, so let me see what's happening here again. Just one moment, class. Please forgive me for stopping every minute. Right, so let me get back on track. So as you can see, Mr. Sun there holds up all the energy, and he sends those little light rays I put right there. So the plant now absorbs all of that energy, uses some for the growth and reproduction process and whatever it needs to do, and loses a little bit due to respiration, and some is going to be lost as heat, but majority of the energy is going to be stored in the plant, whether in the leaves, the seeds, the fruits, the roots, the shoots, wherever it is stored. Good, depending on the plant and their storage organ. Now when an herbivore comes along and feeds on that plant, good, the herbivore comes along and feeds on that plant. First, the herbivore is an animal, so it's going to lose energy via respiration because it has to walk around to get to the plant. So a lot of heat is going to be lost from that animal. When that animal eats the plant, it cannot absorb all of the energy from the plant. Some is going to be lost in the feces and the urine that it produces, and therefore it's going to store less energy than what the plant did. So I want you to understand this because it's going to be repeated. The energy that is stored by the primary consumer is less compared to the energy that was stored by the plant, because the plant only lost a little bit due to respiration and stored majority. Now we come to the herbivore, the primary consumer. It fed on the plant, but it's going to lose energy due to respiration. It's also going to lose energy in the feces and urine that it produces. Therefore, it's going to store a smaller percentage of the energy that it just consumed from the plant. So already we can see that the amount of energy that is being stored here is decreasing. Let's move on now to the secondary consumer. The secondary consumer, when they consume a primary consumer, right, so they're going to go through the same process. So they're going to lose energy through respiration because they have to walk up and down, burn energy, and lose a lot through eat. And when they eat the primary consumer, they're going to lose some of the energy from that food through feces and urine. But importantly, I want you to note that the amount of energy being stored in the tissues of the primary consumer is less. So just imagine now when the secondary consumer eat that primary consumer and then still lose some through feces and urine and respiration, they are going to store even less in terms of percentage than what the primary consumer stored. Following me? So the primary consumer stored less compared to the plant, but now the secondary consumer is even storing less compared to the primary consumer. So we are developing the trend now that there's less and less energy being stored in the animal tissues as we move up the trophic level. Please write that down. Less energy is being stored at each trophic level as we move up the trophic level is being stored in the consumer as we move up the trophic level. Alright guys, so by the time we get up to the tertiary consumer, there's less energy in being stored in the secondary consumer's body. And this is how the relationship comes now. When we look at the food webs, we get to realize that these animals, such as the primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer, they can't just eat one organism to survive. They need more because they're not getting enough energy from just one. So the important takeaway from this diagram that you're looking at is that energy decreases as it moves through the food chain, or you move up the different trophic level. The energy is decreasing. The trophic level with the largest energy reserve is going to be the plant, the producer trophic level. Then the one with the second largest energy reserve is going to be the primary consumer trophic level, and it goes on and on and on. It gets less. So the energy decreases as you move up the trophic level. So that's basically what we were saying, that I was saying, right? There will be situation where there is not enough energy in one trophic level to support another level. And an example of this is like at the tertiary consumer level. I showed you in the video before this an example where we can have a quaternary consumer. Now the quaternary consumer is not always the case because there might not be enough energy at this trophic level to support a quaternary consumer, and that is what I'm saying here. So usually there are no more than 5 trophic levels. 5 trophic levels in a food, in any food chain, because generally that's what the energy can support, those trophic levels. Alright, so energy is not recycled. I want you to know this. Those who do physics would know that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It's only converted from one form to the next. The same rules apply for biology. So the energy is not recycled over and over again. Right? Once it moves through, it moves in and out of the food chains. So it can come out in the form of feces and urine, or in the form of heat from respiration. Good? So that's how the energy is lost at the different trophic levels. Now, energy flow is not cyclical, it's non-cyclical, which, as I just said before, just moves into the food chain and out. Now, the length of the food chain depends on the energy in the biomass available at the trophic level. Now, the biomass, they have that term in red, really refers to the dry mass. Cool? And that is the mass of the living organisms at each trophic level. So at the producer trophic level, I'm talking about the dry mass of all the plants in the ecosystem. And at the primary consumer trophic level, I'm talking about the dry mass of all the primary consumers in the trophic, in the ecosystem. Good? So that is what I am talking about when I say dry mass. Dry mass means that you just heap up all of these, let's say for the producers, all the plants in the ecosystem, and just put them in an oven and dry out all this. So the mass that is left behind, we call that the biomass. That's the mass of the living tissue that's left behind when you drive off all the water that can be consumed now by another organism. So the biomass, more energy, because remember the energy is stored in the plant tissues or in the animal tissues. Good. So the more biomass you have, is the more energy stored at the trophic level. Ultimately, the length of a food chain depends on how much energy is being trapped by the producers in the food chain, and that is what we call productivity of an ecosystem or the food chain. So if you have one wide variety of plants, all of them photosynthesizing, and you have a whole heap of them, then you have a lot of plants converting that light energy into food and store it. So therefore that food chain can be very productive. So it means that you can have a whole heap of organisms going a long way up to even a quaternary consumer. So look at the examples I have right here. You have 2 tropical ecosystems. I have a tropical grassland ecosystem and a tropical rainforest ecosystem. Now I know that you would guess correct if I ask you, where is the higher productivity? Which of these ecosystems have a higher productivity level? And I know you're going to get it correct, because it is a rainforest, tropical rainforest ecosystem, based on the fact that the variety of plants that are there compared to the tropical grassland. Grassland, so grass, that's a go on. That's all you have, grass. Good. We have very few animals that will feed on the grass, but in the tropical rainforest, you can have fruits from different fruits, different trees. You have grass, you have a lake or a river, different streams. So even the ecosystem have different varieties to it. Good. So you will actually have abundance in terms of the types of animals that you can find in that ecosystem. And the reason why you have that abundance is because of the abundance in the producers and the types of producers that we have. So that's what we mean by productivity. The amount of energy being trapped by the producers. And you can see that the tropical rainforest will trap more energy than the tropical grassland. Alright, so now we're going to be looking at ecological pyramids. Now, ecological pyramids class is a representation. You know, like when you do graph and the graph represent the data, could present the data in a more way so you can analyze it. This is what ecological pyramids are. They are a representation of the relationships between the different organisms at their different trophic levels. So ecological pyramids are in the shapes of actual pyramids, with the base being the broadest, which represents the first trophic level, and you know that is the producers. The next trophic level, that is the primary consumers, and so on. So the pyramids actually have, we draw them out in segments. Look at this now. So we have different types of pyramids. We have ecological pyramids that fall in three categories. We use pyramid of numbers. This is the first one we're going to look at, and if you know this, it is just what it is. Pyramid of numbers means that it's going to show you the relationship in terms of numbers at each trophic level. Good. And usually we draw this upright, and as you can see in the picture right here, the producers in green, primary consumers red, and secondary consumers and tertiary consumers go on and on and on. Now, based on the segments that we draw here, everybody realize that the producers have the largest numbers, and then the primary consumers have the second largest numbers, and then the secondary consumers and tertiary consumers follow on down the line. So note that pyramids of numbers can also have different shapes, and the reason for that now is because, remember, it is the number of the organism at each trophic level that we're making a representation of. And look at this now. So we have a tree, one tree, and on that one tree you find more than one caterpillar. So therefore the pyramid, actually the segment representing the producer at the base there, has to be smaller compared to that of the primary consumer above it. And because there's less birds eating those large numbers of caterpillar, then we have to adjust the size of the segment to the amount of organisms that are present at that trophic level. So the number pyramid don't have any fixed shape. Generally we usually have the base being the broadest, which means you have a lot of producers in terms like when we talk about grass. Good. And then the numbers tend to decrease as we go further up, but there are cases where it can be totally upside down, like this one over here, a small bird feeding on a worm that was feeding on a dead tree. Good, this is a food chain, but guess what, we're starting with a producer that is dead. So you can have a dead tree, which means that the products of the products of the plant now that is being decomposed. You have probably a 6, 7, 8 birds feeding on this, and the worms that are feeding on this tree. Good. So the number pyramid, I want you to get this, that it is not a fixed shape. It is showing the relationship in terms of numbers at each trophic level. So you have to pay close attention to the representation that you give to the producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, depending on the food chain. Alright. The next one is the pyramid of biomass. Now in this particular type of ecological pyramid, each level takes into account the amount of biomass, or we want to say the amount of dry weight produced by each trophic level. Instead of estimating the numbers of the organisms at each trophic level, we can estimate the biomass or the dry weight. Ooh. Now the dry weight or the biomass is a direct connection to the amount of energy, but now look on that here, we'll go into that one next. So the pyramid of biomass is also upright, except for that observed in oceans, where large numbers of zooplankton depend on a relatively smaller number of phytoplankton. That example, we won't really come across cases like those. As I said before, we don't focus too heavily on marine ecosystems. We mainly stick to terrestrial ecosystems. So the biomass now is a dry mass, and the dry mass is, as I said earlier, when you get up all the organisms in the ecosystem that we're talking about that are at that trophic level, get all of them up, put them in our oven and dry them out. The mass that is left behind now, we call that the biomass. So the way the biomass is going to be that we're going to put a segment now to represent that weight. And then now we move to this primary consumer level. Get up all the primary consumers within that ecosystem that we're talking about. Put them in the oven and dry out all of the water and leave the body tissue. We call it the dry weight. And then you put a segment to represent that dry weight. What you will find is that, with the exception of this one case that I made here that is in the ocean, what you will find is that the larger biomass is basically where you have all the energy, because remember we just said before that all of the energy that is stored in the plant or animal in their tissue. So when you weigh up that tissue, that gives us, if you have a big ton load of tissue or a high dry weight, that means they have a whole heap of energy in it. Good. A small dry weight, small amount of energy. So biomass and energy are basically proportional or equal to each other. So as I said, pyramid of energy, the only type of ecological pyramid which is always upright. Always upright. Guess what? Biomass is always upright too, except for this one little example here where I point out, like with the phytoplanktons and the zooplanktons, right? And the only reason why that occurs is that the phytoplankton, they are microscopic. So even though they are the energy source, when you dry them, they're going to always be lighter compared to the zooplanktons, which are not microscopic. Alright guys, but outside of that, the biomass is always upright, just like energy pyramid, because the producers lose the least amount of energy, they store maximum amount. So at this level, the producer level, we always have the largest amount of energy present. Good. And then because energy is lost to the environment as we move up the trophic levels, so the pyramid, the segments for the primary, secondary and tertiary consumers will always be smaller. Good. So basically that's it. Energy from the sun is used by the plants during photosynthesis. The energy is stored in the plants and passed on to the consumers, the animals that feed on the plants, right? And the animals actually extract the energy from the food via a process called respiration, where the animal basically burn the food and release the energy from the food. But some of the energy is being lost to the environment as heat, and that lost energy can't be passed on. The only energy that is passed on is that amount that is stored in the animal's tissue. Now consumers lose energy in more than one way. They lose energy through feces, they lose energy through urine, and they lose energy to the environment via heat, right? And so we know how the energy is lost, and we know that once the energy is lost, then it's less amount that is stored at each trophic level. If less is stored there, then it's less going to be stored there, and so it decreases. So one of the things we realize, there is a relationship that as we move up the trophic level, the amount of energy stored is decreasing as we go up. Finally, we looked at the energy pyramids, and we said that the energy pyramids actually is a representation, not energy pyramids but ecological pyramids, actually gives a representation between the relationships at each trophic level. We have three types. We have pyramids of numbers, pyramids of biomass, and pyramids of energy. Pyramids of numbers, they tend to vary because the number of organisms, you count them 1, 2, 3, 4, they tend to vary. Not all the times you can have 100 producers to 50 consumers. Sometimes you can have 50 consumers to 10 producers. So it varies. The biomass, as we say, is the dry weight of the animal tissue. So what we do for that is that we gather up all the producers within the ecosystem, and we put them in the oven and dry out them and collect the dry weight, and weigh them, we make a representation and compare it to the other trophic levels, and so on and so forth. And we said that biomass is directly related to the pyramids of energy, right? Because the biomass is where the energy is stored. So the more biomass is the more energy, the less biomass is less energy. Alright, so we know that those two are related. Alright guys, thank you very much for your time. Hope you learned something today. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to all the videos that are coming out, and please comment, let me know if you're understanding the concepts well, and if you have any questions you can post them in the comment section. I'll try and answer them as best as possible. Alright guys, have a good one.